All right. We are Claire Bishop and scholar, Jack Halberstam is what it said a minute ago. I'm just going to claim that, take that. And we're here both on the occasion of this symposium on Yoko Ono, and also to discuss Claire Bishop's new book, which
is that on the screen?
Is that? There it is, Disordered Attention.
We should just say, though, this has been a great day, and thank you to Tavia and everyone at the Armory for organising this.
Yeah. So we've been an interested audience all day, and the book that Claire's written is really about new modes of spectatorship in the era of the cell phone, the Instagrammable art piece, and in the era of distraction, okay? And there are lots of new books out about attention and attention deficit disorders of various kinds.
This is the cover of today's Times book review supplement, featuring yet 2 more books about attention and distraction. They don't say anything that I do, though. More on that later.
But Claire's book is really different because there are a series of books that are warning us that we've entered into a sort of attention deficit mode, and that we are no longer paying attention to artworks in serious and deep and thoughtful ways. And Claire, you take a different approach, and we're going to get into that in one moment. But I thought to kick things off today, because one of the chapters in the book is about interventionist art in the era of the cell phone and the internet. Have we seen intervention art today, Claire, at the Park Armory?
Thank you, Jack, for that question. I would say that actually we have not seen. It's been, part of the success of the day is that it's a highly curated event, and I would say interventions are not really curated or curatable. They are eruptions of gesture, of performance, often in public space, not inside an institutional context. And which are seeking to generate some friction with that context outside. What we've seen is some very beautiful performances going on, some things that have rubbed against maybe the format of an academic conference, which has been welcome. But I wouldn't necessarily characterize them as interventions. It's interesting. We've got very little connections to Yoko Ono in this bit, but that might be one of them. Is bedpiece an intervention? Is something that we've been thinking about.
But so it can't be an intervention if what? If it's scripted, if it's in a museum space, if it's expected. What makes something an intervention in this era?
In this era? Well, I trace it back over, some 50 years or so, although it does have a much longer genealogy, going back to the historical avant-garde, and I'm sure there are examples prior to that as well, but I tend to usually start with the historical avant-garde. It is, it's something that is more anti-authoritarian and which is seeking to catalyze a public discussion, and in that sense it might also be somewhat undecidable at the moment. So while it has a lot of overlaps with activism, it might not be immediately read as a clear activist gesture with a goal, with a specific outcome in mind.
So, for example, in the book you talk about first a couple of examples from Russia, including Pussy Riot's infamous staging of the punk performance and anthem in the church, and I can't remember the name of the other guy who does the big penis.
It's a collective that preceded Pussy Riot called Vojna, which means war, and they did like a 21-second intervention on the bridge opposite the FBI building, dribbling paint in the shape of an enormous penis. So when the bridge was raised, it did a big dick fuck you to the FBI building.
Right, and then
not FBI, KGB, the equivalent of the FBI.
And then the piece that takes up quite a bit of that chapter, of course, is I Too Demand by Tanya Bruguera, and which had a kind of tension in it between wanting to create a collective moment by having people come to the public square in Havana and say anything that they wanted to say, but also there was a sense of like what happens when either, as happened in this case, the artist is arrested, or when the artist then becomes the story after the event. And
Yeah.
you do quite a bit to unpack that, the tension between the collective gesture of wanting to make an intervention, but then the charisma of the artist, or in an Instagram universe, the fact that the artist becomes the sort of hashtag for an event that might have had a different kind of purpose.
Yeah, so here we see the double-sidedness of social media, I think. So rather than condemning it outright, we can see that it has uses, and it has a lot of uses for social movements and for artists wanting to mobilize. And I have an image here of Pussy Riot somewhere in the mix. This is maybe the first intervention made specifically for social media and for distribution on their own platform, rather than being mediated by the press or TV, which is what happened in previous decades. But of course, what happens with social media, it gives one an outreach, it allows you to reach a huge global audience, but it also has the effect of reducing the gesture to a narrative that is less of a collective call for action and then becomes about the individual. I'm seeing Tanya sitting here in the audience as well. So it becomes much more about the ethics of the individual. Is he or she an attention seeker? Why is it all about them? Rather than that comes to displace the issues that gave rise to the intervention in the first place, which is often a very complicated diagnosis of the conjunction, right? It's often very contradictory. It's pointing out the complexity of the situation, that it's not necessarily very clear, black and white, but things get very reduced on social media, and they get reduced to the back again, this sort of force field back to the individual author or the individual profile holder.
So let's slow down a little bit then and go back to some of the main arguments of the book. And then as we move, we'll come back around to Yoko Ono, and we'll think about the various interventions that are part of her archive. But the book has quite a surprising argument. If someone were to tell you, oh, this book is about attention in the age of the internet and about the impact of distraction on forms of spectatorship, you would probably expect that the book was going to be critical of the way in which the cell phone intervenes between us and visual pleasure. And we've all been in museums where we're trying to see the painting and someone's taking a photograph of, or a selfie or whatever it may be. Now, Claire, you sort of defy expectations, even in your, cranky mode.
In my crankiness,
even in your crankiness, you're actually quite willing to entertain the possibility that our split and distracted attention has actually just simply given rise to new forms of attention that we should spend more time with. And for example, Claire asks us to think about the way that we have learned in the era of mediation, cell phone mediation, to skim, surf, sample, loop, scroll, and read. And these then get even incorporated into artwork that invites you to do just that. So maybe we could even start with the cover of the book, which some of you know is Sea and San Marina from the Venice Biennale. And this was a long durational operatic performance in which people were invited to sort of come in and out. And you begin the book with that. And maybe you can take us through your exposure to that piece and why it seemed like in a way it changed your thinking about attention.
Yeah, it wasn't, but it was a paradigmatic one because it was at the Venice Biennale. Thousands of people saw it. It's touring, it's still continuing to tour. So it's one of these very high status, high visibility works that also seems absolutely designed for photographic circulation online. Because people have been doing durational performances in galleries for 10, 15 years now, right? This is not, in itself, it's not particularly new. But there were a few things about this work that really got under my skin, as well as seemed to be exemplary. And one of them was that, as you can see from the image, it'll scroll around again, but you enter on a balcony platform and look down. So the horizontality and flatness is an important part of the book. Actually, I told you I gesticulate, and we're going to get the mic knocked constantly. And my first reaction was one of total irritation because I couldn't focus on what on earth was going on in the performance because the peripheral noise of the dogs and the children was so relentless, plus plus the performers were on their phones. It wasn't just the audience who were on their phones, the performers were on their phones. So all of this is telling me something about a dispersal of focus and of attention. And I did not want to immediately denigrate this as Instagram fodder, and this is a phrase that comes up repeatedly in relationship to performance in gallery spaces. But instead to think through, actually, what does, this is a new way of organizing attention that seems absolutely attuned to our moment and the way in which we see through our devices. And you're right, I did not want to fall into the usual leftist crankiness of, we are not experiencing the work of art in its full depth. Right. Because that in itself is a historical construction of modernity that we think we should be having these kind of experiences in front of works of art. And when we look back to performance in a longer historical trajectory, when we look at prints and images of especially theater performance, but also museum and gallery audiences in the 18th and 19th century, nobody is standing still in reverent silence in front of a stage or a work of art. Everyone is chatting to each other. There's an image that will come up soon of opera glasses next to somebody holding up a phone in the gallery. These were social spaces, and so part of, I think, the potential of thinking through spectatorship through a cell phone is to rethink the sociality of spectatorship and not simply to fall back on the old narrative of deep, fully focused, attentive, depth model of the subject, modern spectatorship.
So that idea of modern spectatorship is a kind of, would you call it a kind of liberal understanding of an individual, a bounded individual who is educated and meets the work with a certain level of sophistication already? Yeah. Is that the critique?
Yeah, I think there are certain expectations around, the kind of a bourgeois cultivation of a respectful subject who goes into a cultural space and does not want to contest what they've seen, but should approach it with some degree of reverence. And with that comes a whole set of protocols around bodily behavior and how you interact with other people, and whether you shouldn't talk too loud and you shouldn't be too noisy in the space. Of course, all of this is now maybe changing. I've got the specter of the new regime in my mind, and what is going to be shifting in terms of cultural expectations. But maybe we'll get onto that in a moment rather than jumping ahead.
And what about the people who are not at all respectful and in fact are going to go into a gallery and throw a paint on a canvas?
Well, yeah, there you have an intervention. The environmental activists going in with cans of soup and doing this in the National Gallery, that is an intervention, not inviting somebody to make an intervention in a biennial or in our museum exhibition.
Now, what would you say to somebody maybe this will come up in a more sophisticated question later, but is there a note of techno-optimism in this reading? I mean, there's a way in which you can't go back to the undistracted viewer. Like, none of us, even today, when we're in these sessions, we're often also on our phones. We're also wondering about what's happening in several different platforms and levels of representation. So we can't go back. But at the same time, given the moment that we're in, is there a desire to completely get offline? And what does that mean for this new set of skills that we've learned in relationship to a distraction economy, I would even call it, to mirror your
I know. Well, okay.
Economy.
So I would say one of the real difficulties of writing this book was that conjunction was continually shifting from when I started it in the last book came out in 2012, 2013. So then we're like, okay, so we're chugging along in the Obama years, then Trump 1 comes along and seems to shift the kind of value system around a lot of things that I'm looking at. The field against which contemporary art is operating, you have to take that into account in order to understand the kind of synergy, or what the aesthetics of these politics and the politics of these aesthetics are. And now we're back in, then it flipped back again with the pandemic and Biden, and now we're being lurched into a new conjunction, and the end of the Cold War world order and Pax Americana. And of course, with that, a very different relationship to technology. We now have these tech oligarchs have the ear of the president and are no longer, at best they were maybe, centrists, And now they have fallen right in with the far right. So this makes it very difficult to think about, okay, this is a book that's now already 6 months out and very dated because everything has shifted once again. So I didn't set out to write a tech optimism book, but I did want to write a tech neutral book because it seemed to be that most of the literature was doom-mongering, whether it was Jonathan Crary or Bernard Stiegler or many other popular books that have been published since the late 2000s. And some of those are great and they make good points, and Crary and Stiegler, I'm on board with a lot of it, but it is relentlessly pessimistic to the point of how we're supposed to even function with this stuff that is so central to our lives. But neither did I want to go all out on tech optimism. But it's very clear now that a neutral position on technology might not be sustainable, and yes, I do think we have to rethink the appeal of a lot of these platforms.
Just as you were talking, I was thinking, what happens to the role of the critic when you've got audiences who are multiply engaged and distracted? You have artists who are both making work that is Instagrammable and wanting to make work that stands outside of all of these social media platforms. But it seems to me that the work of the art historian or the art critic is also sort of restyled. And I was thinking about this when I was reading in the first chapter about the Wolfgang Tillmans exhibit, which some people will remember, probably went to it at MoMA. I found it so overwhelming. There was so much material. There were vitrines filled with, written text. There were photographs from every period of his life. And I'd been in there about an hour and a half, and I was like, I'm exhausted. I've got to leave, which is one of your kind of, I think, examples of scrolling. No, not scrolling. Skimming, maybe.
Skimming and sampling.
That we skim and we sample when we're in an exhibit that overwhelms us like that. But when I read your take on it, I realized, oh, you're my guide. I need the critic again in the same way that, an undergraduate student reading The Wasteland needs a bunch of references to figure out what's this Greek reference to, and so on. So is there now, again, a kind of elevation of the role or an intensification of the role of the critic?
I don't know. I think I think there has always been a need for someone to wade through the glut of cultural production. And it's like a DJ or a curator, right? You're doing a cut, yeah. And you're sifting through and making a selection that's of interest to you, just as the curator hopefully is also making a selection that also speaks to a larger cultural situation, and also is mindful of the dramaturgy of an exhibition, what you're capable of taking in, and how things are organized in a way that allow you to, where things become memorable when they're put together meaningfully. Has the role of the critic changed? I don't know. Is the role of a critic? I think it's more. Maybe the question for me is, what is the role of a not what is the role of a critic, but how has criticism changed with online publishing?
Yeah, you mean because people can get the take on the piece in many different places?
Yes, and that the editing isn't very good, and then there's too much of it again. So you need a digest of the criticism to get to the criticism. But maybe this is where books come in. That old-fashioned idea.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I wonder, maybe we can talk a little bit about durational work. I was just, as I said to you in the note I sent you, I loved that quote about durational performance from Robert Wilson. If you fall asleep, when you wake up, it will still be going on. And I've had that experience many times, most recently at Taylor Mac that we went to together, and it was still going on. But I wonder about how you make a connection then between attention economy and durational performances, which we're seeing more of, even as our attention is very scattered. There's also sort of an emphasis on duration. And I was
It's not a coincidence that we've got a resurgence of interest in duration precisely at the moment when we're all like doing multiple things and multitasking and multi-platforming. There is a profound desire to be spending time in a room, maybe trapped in a room with other people with the door shut for a certain amount of time, and to have to go through that experience. And you can't fast forward us right now. You have to sit through it. And there is
Much as they may want to.
They really want to.
Or
I can see them looking at the door, wanting to leave. There is yes, I think there's a really profound appreciation of being in a room. And like we thought after COVID, we don't need to do conferences in person again, right? We saved so much money. We can do it all on Zoom. No, people love being in a room and comparing the dynamic of it. There's so much that we don't get. Obviously, you will know this from being together in a room. At the same time, I think the appeal of durational performance is also precisely that you can take photos, text and fall asleep, and talk to your friends in the middle of it.
Yeah. Which was interesting in relationship to Julia's re-performance of Cut Piece, which I thought we might usefully talk about, especially maybe there were some people in the room who were there. You said to me afterwards, Claire, almost no one was taking photographs. What did you make of that?
Wasn't that interesting?
Yeah.
I don't know why that was. Why were people censoring? Or they're a very lofty crowd who feel that they need to give full attention and not be taking photos. But I was way at the back, like, photos, look who's doing this. Oh, wow.
And talking.
Yeah. And I really, because the striking thing from the film footage that Bridget showed us in this room at 1 o'clock this afternoon was the noise of everybody talking in relationship to Cut Piece. Who's going to go up next? All of that. Comments, obviously objectifying her, talking about it, but this silence, the respectful silence, was really quite something in the room.
And we were saying that following from Jennifer's, really stark presentation about rape and about the afterlife of the woman who was in the Lennon Ono film, that there was a kind of feeling in the room that made us less sure about how we should be in relationship to a very vulnerable female body on the stage.
Yes.
So there's a kind of cumulative effect, notice, of back-to-back discourse, performance. There's a kind of mounting sense of tension that played into maybe the way in which people were responded.
Absolutely. I think it was completely overshadowed by that harsh discussion of rape that Jennifer gave us beforehand. But then how interesting that the mood, and apologies for those of you who weren't in the room, it was really great. You should have been there. Really Maybe you'll look at it online later. It was when Castles came up onto the stage and started cutting their own sweater, completely flipped the dynamic by what I think was intended to be read as a gesture of solidarity, but also as a little bit of exhibitionism and attention-seeking, and made me think about Julia as exhibitionist and attention-seeking in a way that completely changed it, because the affect of the piece is so much about no eye contact, looking ahead, looking like a victim. And actually, maybe that's not what the piece is about.
What is the piece about?
Well, maybe it's more about exhibitionism and a desire to be center of attention and be there half-dressed in public.
Yeah, that's right. And there are multiple interpretations, including Julia's, of course, out in the world of Cut Piece, at least some of which are focused on sacrifice. But of course, it isn't called sacrifice piece, it's called cut piece. And the gesture of cutting is actually quite a violent gesture. I mean, these are big, heavy scissors. You're cutting somebody's clothing off. It isn't going to stay in the realm of niceness.
But I have to say, the cut is also the cut between genders, and male and female being so starkly passed in the 60s. And the version that we just saw was, I would say, very gender fluid, and was a queer take on Cut Piece. It was not, and part of that, the silence in the room, and I think, and the hesitancy around it was also about how all of that gender dynamic was being navigated in the present day.
So how the piece lands now. I feel like we're like British football commentators.
I know, it's good, I know. So, in the second half...
Great pass. I think every performance should probably have us afterwards.
I think so. I think
How do you think Julia performed?
I think she did very well.
Very well with,
She's always been out there. She's always been an art historian who's gone there with performance. She did Trio A before any of us, the rest of us were thinking of it.
She knew the piece inside and out. Yeah. We knew it would come to this, Claire.
Okay.
We really did. Okay.
What next? What should we talk about next?
Well, I mean, we are talking about Yoko Ono, and you said something that I thought was really great when we were upstairs, which is that message, the sort of give peace a chance message. You know, we want to say, oh, it's so important right now, but it's actually a very, very inadequate and sort of mealy-mouthed message, give peace a chance. Even then, you were saying, even then, probably it fell on the ears of students who were busily protesting and being shot at on college campuses, as they are today. Give peace a chance is not necessarily the message that gives peace a chance. And I wonder, you know, if we want to think through what peace means, and of course we have peace as in give peace a chance as well as cut peace. Peace is about peace.
Yeah, you've totally taken my point. I don't have anything to add to it now. I was just thinking through, but you know, Yoko Ono is, if we're going to have, you know, our senior female artist, she's a really good one. At the same time, there are moments when you're maybe not quite so much, and the call for the privilege. Oh no, it's not privilege. Let's say she's leveraging the celebrity opportunity that she had with Lennon at that moment in 1969 to turn their honeymoon into a media situation, and to, you know, it did have some effects. At the same time, I can understand it being absolutely inadequate to a younger generation or a generation of students on campuses. Or people whose kids are being sent off, being drafted for Vietnam. So I don't really have another point to make apart from that thought nugget. That
I mean, I think it's well said, though, and I think the bed piece, I wonder if it has aged as well. You know, a heterosexual.
There you go.
There it is. Yeah, a heterosexual couple being multiply photographed. Some sense that, like, having a lot of sex will save us all, you know, which Yoko Ono, after Bed Peace, actually made a statement to that effect and said if only Eva Braun had 10 days in bed with Hitler, we would not have had the same outcome in World War II. And as you can imagine, in 1969, this did not land at all well. But there's a kind of naive optimism in this piece, I think, that, for me anyway, speaks to that word that you used, inadequacy of in relationship to what's happening in the moment.
But, you know, there's also a thing, maybe it also comes back to the question of interventions, that there's often a simplicity about it, and that's what gets something media traction. What allows something to go viral is that can it be boiled down to a very simple message and a very simple image, and don't underestimate the potency of that. And I would also maybe pull back from being too critical, because I think at these moments where we're really, you know, nosediving into fascism, it's an all-hands-on-deck situation. Melania, if you're listening to this...
Well, let's talk about fascism for a few minutes, and then we'll open it up to the room to jump in on that. I'm super excited because I have tickets for you and I to come and see Anne Imhoff here at the Park Armory next month. Yeah. And I haven't seen Anne Imhoff, one of her performances or stages before. Yeah. And when I was reading up on her, there's a lot of material online about how some of these very stark, symmetrical, geometric sets that she has and some of the aesthetics that she creates have a kind of fascist orientation. And of course, that's her entire narrative about her work is from the perspective of being anti-fascist. But in this moment, is there a danger of being ambiguous in relationship to the aesthetic that you use as a platform for your message? Can you afford to, and you said this also about the Lady Gaga video, the Abracadabra, if something partakes in a fascist aesthetic, can it also have a kind of anti-fascist orientation or message?
Well, I'd want to back up for a moment and
Yeah.
just say, what is a fascist aesthetic? Because it can be many things, and it has been many things. And we tend to default to a 1930s understanding of what a fascist aesthetic is, and specifically a German 30s, not an Italian 30s, which was much more Catholic and inclusive and could include avant-garde movements like Futurism. So, we think of Germany being about, epic scale and light and military choreographed bodies, ethnic purity, what else? Anyway, yeah, you could like uniformity, yes, synchronized choreography, Leni Riefenstahl, Albert Speer, right? In a nutshell. And that's not Anne Imhoff by any stretch of the imagination, right? We've got something much more grungy, photogenic, much more fashion magazine, clearly geared towards being photographed and circulated, again, like Sun and Sea Marina. And also, much more queer, much more multiracial. And so I find, fascist aesthetic there is a way of denigrating the work and of not doing the job of looking closely at it. At the same time, I would not, she's holding back from any overt political statements as far as I can tell. She'll be doing a talk here on the 8th or something, so we'll find out. But it does raise the question of, where are we with ambiguity at this point, with aesthetic ambiguity? There's always an ambivalence to the aesthetic. It's not writing. It's not language. And part of the problem, maybe, okay, here's a big statement. Part of the problem of where we're at right now is that social media reduces every image to with a caption alongside it. Mm-hmm. It is spelled out. It is declarative. We know exactly where people stand on Palestine. We know where they stand on the environment. We know where everything is open and out there. And a result of that has been a loss of the complexity of reading images. And now I'm starting to sound cranky and cantankerous again. It will come out. So I don't know. I think in this moment there's going to be a move. I move back towards some more ambiguous, subversive. People might be playing. I mean, maybe Anne Imhoff is playing with over-identification, but there are lots of other strategies that are going to come into play. The more that culture is going to be micromanaged, and I'm sure the right is going to. I mean, they're already slashing all of the national institutions and the National Gallery and Smithsonian and so on. Their budget. This is all very, blue chip art that is held in those places. So they will probably. But it's interesting to see what the incoming, administration are going to be supporting. What is going to be at the Kennedy Center?
Right.
With
exactly.
Trump in charge, who's going to be performing there, and what will
be in their degenerate art show?
Yes,
possibly. Yeah.
Well, we have degenerate art already in Germany again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Anyone who speaks up for Gaza is now a degenerate artist and no longer receives funding and has their exhibitions and performances cancelled.
Yeah. Okay. What if?
Let's take a question
for the last 10 minutes. Thank you. We will open up, and I invite people to both ask about this really amazing book and encourage you to go out and buy it and read it. It's very of the moment. But also you can meditate upon things you've seen today. We can dive into some of those discussions as well. We are at the end of a long day of presentations and so on. Them a minute.
Over here. Hi, thank you. I was wondering, as you were talking about attention economy, if we could sort of specify that a little bit, because there's in that kind of general way that we talk about an economy or an ecosystem of attention, but there's also a very specific idea of an attention economy as a form of capitalism that is pretty specific to neoliberalism, and especially with when capitalism and the internet really take off in the early 2000s, that is, on the one hand, the capitalization of attention, right? And on the other hand, spectacle and the idea that that experience and attention is where it's at, and that's why museums lean into the blockbuster shows and the star architects and all of that. So attention as attraction, right? Because that's value. But I think the part that's been so devastating, actually, and if anyone's a parent and has a phone-enabled child, what's the most frightening, it's not the distraction, right, or the hyper-focus, really, but the fact that it's all mediated, it's all making money for corporations, right, and for Google, that I'm wondering about where that kind of political economy of attention comes into our experience of art, or whether it should.
You threw a curveball there right at the end. And I totally agree with you with all of this. Yes.
So how could that potentially change or inflect the stakes of how we look at art, and more particularly, what art asks us to do, how it stages attention?
I feel like that's what the book's about, so I'm finding it hard to boil it down
No,
into a quick answer.
So can you connect that to the idea of the political economy? The capitalism, please.
I mean, I don't know. It seems such a. That seems to be so obvious. I don't know how to expand on that. Well, Jack, you've help me.
I mean, I think Claire's right. That is what the book is about: is the tension between, an attention economy that we all participate in, and the way in which then even our distraction returns money to the institution. And I think that's what you're saying. It's more than just like whether the art shifts its modality in relationship to new platforms, but then how does this shift the way in which it becomes a new platform for capital, for the intensification of profit, for the museum to again become a profit-making institution, for someone to pin a banana on a wall and ask for $5 million, and so on.
But I was also interested in the way in which we internalize our relationship to digital technology, and that produces different ways of looking, even when we're not looking at screens. It produces a different way of reading, a different way of thinking through the social or the dynamics of being in a space with people. Is that how you were thinking of it?
That's all great. That's all helpful.
Yeah. Got a question over here?
Hey, I was wondering if you could talk about violence with actions, and maybe speak about Luigi Mangione, and if that is at all, like, where is the line there?
Well, I mean, that's a murder, not a work of art, right?
But
I
the
was
response.
standing right there this morning,
Yeah.
outside the Hilton, because that's where the College Art Association conference is this weekend. What do you say, the response? Yeah, I mean, it's typical of anything that is viral, right? And so what you saw was that there is a chart called the sigmoid curve, which is used for epidemics, but of course it's also used for anything viral in the media, and they chart exactly the same way. It's a huge peak of interest, a plateau, and a very fast tailing off. And we experienced the tailing off instantly as soon as the police caught him. There was zero interest in this person anymore. The mystery was over. So I don't know much more to say about that apart from the mechanism of perception and attention around it.
The notes on the bullets, like
Use the mic.
Sorry, like the notes on the bullets, like it's like he had it was almost a performance.
No, it was wonderful. It was delightful. I mean, I'm not the only one who was completely enchanted by this. You know? Like for 4 or 5 beautiful days, it was like a real life murder mystery happening in the city, and we were cheering him on, and then and now it's going to be another kind of justice will be meted out in due course.
I was wondering if you could talk about like outdatedness with social media, but also how things get kind of exhumed and resuscitated. So you have like the early 2000s memes that happen, but then now you also have them kind of come back. And so I was wondering if you could talk about kind of the temporality of like the social media, how things go outdated so quickly, and yet they kind of still come back. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this the usual take on this is that there's a flattening, right? The digital technology and the web especially has produced a horizontalizing of temporal experience. Everything gets flattened to the same MP3, MP4 digital interface. Everything is. We're in this sort of like constant homogeneous experience of time. That's one way of looking at it. On the other hand, there's like, this is the most incredible archive for uncovering stuff. There has never been a more amazing time to be a researcher. There is so much stuff that we can dig out now and have access to. And social media is its own form of research tool for us. I noticed Bridget's lecture this morning had tweets and web links, and there's a whole different set of footnoting and referencing that comes up now around this. That's not quite what you're asking me, of course, but...
But it actually brings us around to the very beginning of our conversation when you said, the book's been out 6 months, it's already outdated, and so there it is. That's the problem with taking on media techniques or, new modalities that seem new today, and by the evening they're over already. This is a very, very fast pace. And I think what I really appreciate about this book is it also goes at a terrific pace through an enormous amount of work, but by the end of the book, you've really kind of learned to think with these modes that Claire has identified and located within an expanded understanding of the art world and within a much more capacious sense of what a spectator is and does. And I'll just read you, by way of closing, the last paragraph of the book, which is a little hopeful, but we need that.
Not anymore.
Where Claire writes, much like utopian architecture, visual art has the capacity to envisage new ways of being together, to prefigure the future in the present, to propose visions of the world that are both representations and aspirations. Rather than gazing spellbound in the rearview mirror, artists are ideally situated to dream up potent new images. These don't need to be grand schemes, just experiments in thinking and seeing the world more imaginatively. And we've all spent time with those experiments today. So I want to thank you, Claire, for your work. Thank you, Tavia, for the whole day.
Thank you.